Me? No, I'm not. I am neither naturally humorous.
This
No, I'm
is the
joking.
beginning of Shanice's leadership bid for your party. If anyone didn't understand that, that's the point of this podcast.
That's where all the money's going.
Yeah.
Not gonna happen. Hello and welcome to this week's Life of the Party, a deep dive into everything to do with your party, the Green Party, a New Left Party, whichever party we all end up being a part of. I'm your host Shanice McBean and I'm here with my friends and comrades Jonas.
Yo.
And Joe.
Hey.
So this week, obviously, it's going to be all about your party's conference. But before we get into that, Joe, you've got a message for our listeners.
I do have a message. I've been the one designated to make this ask of our good listeners and the community around the podcast. Basically, we are setting up a Patreon style thing. It's actually not a Patreon. It is our own little donation built platform, which means we don't have to give 10% to the horrible big corporate capitalist Patreon. Basically, we're asking for donations and regular supporters for the same reason everybody else asks for donations and regular supporters. I mean, it takes a lot of work to do the podcast. It takes a lot of work to do all the reading, to edit for it. We've had to buy microphones, yada, yada, yada. You know the drill. Like, it's really, really, really cool how many of you are listening. And to be honest, just like how much feedback we've got from friends and comrades about how much they value the podcast. And we would just kindly ask that, if you do really value it and you want it to keep going and you want us to do more stuff and potentially go weekly and do other forms of audio content, including going out to local groups across the country, be it in the Green Party or your party, or doing more examinations of what different parties are doing abroad, then yeah, we just really encourage you to donate. If you do want to donate and you do want to become a supporter, you can go to lifeoftheparty.uk/support. There's also going to be a load of extra stuff that you get. You're going to get an email from me, Jonas, or Shanice every once in a while with like reading lists and gossip and stuff like that. If we do events, you're going to get into those events for free or at a discount. And if you give us a decent chunk of money, we'll even read your name or your branch's name out at the end of every podcast. Ooh. I don't know why you'd want that, but if you want that, that's fair enough. So yeah, lifeoftheparty.uk/support.
Yeah, give us your money.
I hope that wasn't too awkward. Was that awkward? I didn't rehearse it.
It was awkward and endearing.
All right, fine. Is that my character? Awkward and endearing.
It actually is. Yeah, it is. Yeah, you are quite endearing, and you are a little bit awkward. But I think we're all a bit awkward, and that's fine.
Yeah.
I think Jonas is the least awkward of us. I think Jonas is the coolest.
Oh wow.
Yeah. I don't know what I am. Anyway.
Get rid of this bit. Keep it.
No. I mean, the good thing about this podcast you're doing, there's only 2 mics, and at the moment Jonas is not on one of them, so he's just kind of like shouting in the background,
Which is not very cool.
Okay, so as we said, this episode's going to be all about your party conference. I didn't get to go, so I'm gutted about it. Absolutely immiserated. So sad.
I am actually sad I didn't get to go.
I am
actually sad.
However, Jonas had the privilege and luck of going, and he's going to tell us all about it. Over to you, Jonas.
Yeah, I had mixed feelings about going. I only went for the Saturday, cards on the table. That's the only day I was sortitioned for. It was the only day I applied for. So I've got a kind of uneven assessment, but I've talked to a few friends and comrades from across the movement about the Sunday. I'm not going to do a chronology here of the kind of long dramas of the weekend, because you've all probably had that by now. And I should say from the offset that if this conference was fragile, it was nothing as fragile as me going to it after a gig and a bit of a sesh the night before. But yeah, look, my general feeling was that it was a bit chaotic, manic at times. It was pretty staged managed, but it was also poorly managed. Like, you had instances where there was like no meaningful control over the floor. Like several times the chair would call speakers from the floor to speak to rival options that were being debated. And several times people would put their hand up to come up for the party centre's option and then speak against it. Like, like in a debate on whether the party should have the working class at its heart, there was a comrade who got up to speak against the idea, but then did a sarcastic rant on why billionaires need greater political representation. So there was that vibe kind of bled through the day. I didn't sit with any factions or anything like that. I sat with my branch for most of the day, which it gave me a bit of a different insight into the branch than I think if I would have sat with factions, which is no shade to the factions, but I was probably in my branch one of the more cynical people in the crew about how the day would go and what the day would look like, especially after months of kind of limbo and disaster. But there was something significant about getting to meet party members from across the country, hear their ideas, hear what they're up to. And, you know, we met people that we didn't know from our locality, for example. So like there was a little bit of that as well, which was good. I mean, overwhelmingly, a big sense that I had was that the way they structured the conversation over like organizational questions, over constitutional questions, kind of shrouded in the controversies of the evening before, where they expelled SWP members and on the day they excluded one of Zara Sultana's entourage from coming into the building. That really framed lots of the conversation, and it really limited, I think, how rich the conversation could have been. So what you got a lot of the time, and this is no shade to people speaking, was a lot of people venting, a lot of people talking at each other, across each other, a fair amount of repetition because the thing was really badly organized in terms of who was coming to the stage. Like it was kind of hilarious in lots of ways, particularly by the afternoon. In the morning, I was like super disorientated. I was like, what is going on here? Like, this is just wild. Like, by the afternoon, I was a bit grounded. I had a kebab for lunch. And like you just had a sense that like people were like quite pissed off in the room and pretty insurgent. And the room was really divided at different points. Like you could tell different bits of the room cheering for different arguments, but like there was almost like a kind of universal disdain and mockery for the kind of hollow and petty authoritarianism from like the chairs and the way it was structured, which was like a bit of a weird bonding exercise amongst people who clearly disagreed, at least in the bit that I was at. And one of the interesting things is the composition of the conference. So we talked about the regional assemblies a couple of weeks ago, and we'd noted that the regional assemblies were much whiter, much more blokey, much older. I wouldn't say that necessarily about the conference. I think partly this is just a product of sortition, right? Is that you kind of produce a result which is a bit more diverse in terms of race, gender, age, and region than a delegate system may have done, which isn't to say it was perfect by any means. Like it was definitely a bit on the older side, but it wasn't as bad as I thought it was. The far left was disproportionately represented at the conference, but I also didn't feel like you were at a conference of far lefties. Like there were lots of people who didn't belong to the kind of classic organized left, like particularly in my group, like we had about 11 or 12 people from Stoke and the Newcastle area. And yeah, most of those people are not on the far left, for example. So in terms of like what was passed and what wasn't, so like on the Saturday morning, the big conversations were, are we a socialist party? Do we have the working class at our heart? And do we want the broadest social alliance possible? All three of these won. And there was a funny contribution on the last one where someone said we shouldn't, underestimate the potential of going into coalition with Nigel Farage, to which they got lots of boos.
You should see Shanice's face. If only we had video.
Yeah, you really should. Big debates are about dual membership, whether people should be allowed in other political parties. Lots of confusion running into this, right? Like that was one of the grounds in which the SWP members got expelled. Corbyn had been given really inconsistent communications on this on the day and before, saying that like if you're in a party that's registered with the Electoral Commission and you can't be a member, but if you're, and then later kind of changing that, like so it was a bit all over the place. But that really coloured the debate, and the dual membership was carried, not like Carrie Murphy, but like
crap,
the opposite of like carried. I don't know. I was just confused by the words. We should probably cut this bit.
No.
And then there was like the debates around collective leadership, which I think we'll probably end up discussing a little bit. Like do you have a leadership and then a central executive committee, or do you have a collective leadership? The collective leadership won. That was one of the closer votes of the conference, like really close, like Brexit levels close. There was some debates about the level of quorum. This is really in the gritty niches now of like all members' meetings at branches. So it was like 20, 30, 45 and 50, I believe, and 20% won out, which I think is good. to be honest with you. Like at this stage, when they've burnt so many bridges that have like lower barriers to participation, I think is a good thing. Loads of debates about branch autonomy, like how much money goes to branches, whether branches get money that hasn't got regional oversight or national oversight, which was good. They won. I think in the current situation, that's good. One of the big points of controversy was this question of the workers' wage, which was a motion submitted by the Democratic Socialists of your party, one of the factions that have been really pushing democratic questions inside. And it was one of the highest amount of endorsements that any of the motions had got. But it was initially struck off the record for bad grammar. And then when the grammar was made good and it was re-uploaded, it was then struck off multiple times again, even though it was edited to perfection. And the DSYP comrades forced it on the agenda. They had almost like a rally outside the kind of shadowy dark room where people would go to put their grievances about the process. I forgot the name of it now. But it was incredibly popular, despite the leadership refusing it. So yeah, basically, like for me, there's a big question here about...
Wait, just to clarify on that, Jonas, so that didn't go to the floor in the end?
So there was discussions about it. Lots of people brought it up in separate things, but to my knowledge, it didn't go to the floor on the Saturday. To my knowledge, on the Sunday, it didn't go to the floor as a thing that can be voted on and discussed.
Right. Okay.
The leadership were quite cautious about that. So these were some of the big debates that mattered from my impressions. There's also other debates that I think were really important, but that were like framed by the leadership in quite a poor way, I think. Like, for example, whether the party is pro-trans was a debate that came up. And actually, contrary, I think, to some of the conceptions that people have come up on both the left and the right of the party, like being pro-trans was something that absolutely cut across racial divides and religious divides. It's something that like I picked up and noticed, and that a few people had observed to me. So that's something that's really worth bearing in mind when we come up with certain stereotypes about who has what positions in the party. I guess what will meaningfully contribute towards how your party will change and go forward from this. The period that's about to happen with your party is one where there will be elections to the CEC, the Central Executive Committee. That's going to be testy and controversial, I think. There's going to be a lot of stuff that happens there. I think money and quorum, so branch autonomy and reducing barriers to participation, for me, are quite important. You know, there's a process which will begin in the new year once an approval committee is sortitioned, basically, where branches can formally become part of the organisation nationally. If that can get moving, I think that's a good thing. I think a bad thing is the name. The name sucks. It's crap. Sucks. It's internal. It's navel-gazing. And ultimately, I think it's totally discredited. Like, it's not a name that I feel any pride in. The options that were given were all crap. It was your party, our party, for the many, which is what I voted for, not because I thought it was good, but because I thought it was a better option. It was outwards looking, and I've forgotten the fourth one now. So yeah, there's some observations. And Popular Alliance, God, don't remind me, that was awful, wasn't it? So yeah, a big question that comes from this now, something that we should discuss, I think, is after all of this, after what I would say is probably a good weekend for Zara Sultana and the far left, there's a question now about who has power inside your party.
Yeah, great question. And I think one of the reflections that I have about the conference is around political culture. And it seems to me that the left won a lot of the arguments and debates and votes at the conference, precisely because so much of it was litigated online and on social media. So I think about, the votes on trans liberation, the votes on being a socialist party, the vote on dual membership, the vote on having the working class at the heart of the party. All of these debates have featured in quite fractious, sometimes toxic online discussions. And the one vote that went through that kind of hasn't featured in online debate and discussion, which was on trade union affiliation and having a group that would, basically a group of fat cat trade union bureaucrats who would go away.
You can tell Shanice is really objective about this one.
Yeah, I voted very firmly against. But basically a group of trade union bureaucrats who go away and work on trade union affiliation. And I think there are lots of reasons why trade unions shouldn't affiliate to your party. That debate wasn't litigated online. I don't think it's a surprise that it was voted through like quite overwhelmingly. And I think this says something quite pertinent, I think, about the political culture at the moment. And, Corbyn calls the online debates toxic, and that's probably because he's on the losing end of them. But I think it also says something maybe about the kind of weakness of the branch structures at the moment and them not kind of holding room and space for these debates to proliferate on the kind of national level yet. When they become incorporated into your party and when they're kind of empowered and strengthened and have money, maybe that will change. But yeah, I guess maybe it's just something to acknowledge just how many of these debates were won because of fractious online conversation.
Yeah, and I think that's right. That culture and kind of like lack of structure and lack of ability to flow information across the organization in different ways. It's very reminiscent of the Democratic Socialists of America, really. A lot of their debates are driven by different factions coming from different positions, and then those arguments spilling out onto Twitter and online because that's where they can reach people who are likely to be party members and who can actually vote on these things. So yeah, you can see a version of your party emerging that just has a lot of both the positive and frankly negative like traits that the DSA has in the US.
Yeah, and then when it comes to the question of who has power, it's no surprise to me that the Member of Parliament, Zara Sultana, who's probably best able out of all the Independent Alliance to utilise social media, it's really popular amongst a younger generation, it's quite social media literate. It's no surprise that she actually swung a lot of the votes in her favour.
Yeah, and I think it's definitely a fair account of conference as far as I can tell to think of it as the leadership / Corbyn faction losing and the Zara Sultana / far left faction winning. And we've definitely ended up with, I think it's fair to say, a set of rules and procedures and a constitution which is far more democratic than most activists thought we'd end up with after this conference. And that's only because there's been massive pressure from members and from the factions and because people have pushed and made it essentially untenable for the leadership to stitch it up in a very strong way. But yeah, it should be seen as a victory for those people that wanted more democracy in the party and more member control, for sure.
Yeah, there's a lot here, isn't there? Like, I think like it's clear that Zara and the kind of alliance that Zara had built, which involved the Democratic Socialists, your party involved the Democratic Bloc and others, was ascendant, that it was their weekend. The centre lost the battle. It's worth saying that they still control the party, and that is quite decisive. And I would be personally surprised if there wasn't some kind of reprisals over the next month or so, like in terms of like expulsions of members or something along those lines. I just wouldn't put it past these people at this stage. A few people did tell me, and I don't actually take any satisfaction in this. Like, I find it a bit sad, really, but a few people did say they saw Corbyn on the train back and he looked quite dispirited and defeated, and like however you think this process has gone, like I don't think that bodes well for the project, actually, to have like its lodestar feeling down about it. I think the democratic space opened in no small part because the political centre of the project was so incompetent. Like, they completely overreached several times. They discredited their authority and their just basic ability to do basic things quite a lot. And like, I think they probably alienated large parts of the base that are sympathetic to them. Like, I got the train up in the morning. I was desperately trying to get some sleep on the train. Realised like quite soon that this only people on this train at 6:30 in the morning are going to your party conference, and all they wanted to talk about was your party and the Green Party. It was like listening to like Life of the Party. It was like being on the other, it was like being on the other side of the podcast. Except I desperately wanted to go to sleep, and I got the sense just listening to some of those conversations that there were people who would typically be Corbynistas who were just dead frustrated with the process and like. Who's kind of, that kind of thing that we always talk about with Corbynism, or there's a love for Corbynism, but does that mean people are socialist cadre? Actually kind of broke down a little bit through the crisis of the project. I think there's a case to say that branches are winners from this. I kind of alluded to that earlier. Like, we had a meeting a couple of evenings ago locally, and because people had been on the Sunday, where it felt a bit more determined and it felt a bit more uplifting, where I was just there on the Saturday, which felt quite disorientating. There was definitely a bigger sense amongst people who had been there for the whole weekend that like, oh shit, this is like real now. We are part of a national political party. And now people are starting to talk about all sorts of stuff that we do, and like the stakes feel a bit bigger and all of that. So I think that's quite important. I think one of the question for me is like, Zara will probably feel empowered. The far left of its different, the factions or the sects will feel empowered. But one of my worries is like, especially with this Central Executive Committee election coming up, is like, to what extent are we going to have a bit more of an outwards looking focus? or to what extent is it just going to be another couple of months of navel gazing and internal fighting? Not to say that the CEC elections aren't important, they really are, but it really matters how you look to the outside world. And we really need to start taking that a bit seriously if this is going to work.
I do think I disagree with you a little bit, though, on branches being empowered. I think long term, I have some doubts. A couple of votes that pass that give me these doubts. So the first one, and I voted for this actually, which is that conferences would be made up of a combination of delegates from branches and also sortition. And I think, the composition of this conference, from everything that I've seen from the coverage and what I'm hearing from comrades, shows that sortition probably is a good thing for having balance and diversity and a good spread of different people that's representative. At the same time, when you combine an element of sortition with members being able to vote at conferences online from home, we now have a situation where there are two dynamics happening in the party. You've got the democracy of the branch, and then you've got the democracy of what I talked about earlier, the online political cultures, the political cultures that exist outside of the party. And essentially now it's institutionalized in your party that you can be a member, not participate in a branch, be part of the quite fractious debates and political culture that takes place online and on social media, and still have an equal stake in conference votes as a committed branch member. And I'm not making a moral or ethical judgment on is that right or wrong, but I'm just kind of pointing out this structural and material reality in your party at the moment, where actually, and that will be in the future, where branches are both empowered and disempowered. And that's now kind of constitutionally going to be a part of the party moving forward. And therefore, I think we'll have organising consequences, to win votes. It's not just going to be a case of taking things to branch and winning them there and winning them on the conference floor. It's also now going to be about how you litigate things on social media, in political cultures outside of the party.
Yeah, and the way the party's structured is still a long way from the platform parties of the 2010s that Paolo Giabado described. So Five Star Movement in Italy or Podemos in Spain, where everything was online and everything was done by online plebiscite. And there was this idea that we had this kind of new radical form of democracy inside parties where you just log onto a platform and you vote. And obviously one of the problems with that is that it's really, really open to elite manipulation, because which questions are asked and allowed to go through an amendment process is very pertinent, as we've seen with the workers' wage in the run-up to conference. But also there's just no deliberation amongst members in person where you can sit and change your mind and learn from people. And that's, I've been chatting to loads of people who went to conference this weekend, and they just say what I've heard from a lot of people who have been to other party political conferences that are good, like the Green parties, which is that they changed their mind quite a few times over the course of the weekend, even though they came there with a certain set of views and maybe even associated with a certain faction. And I think that's just good. It's a nourishing and learning and generative experience for people to do that in a room with others. And I don't think we should lose sight of that. And I'm not sure I'd want to give a definitive take on, say, we have too much OMOV in the party now, or we have to. But we shouldn't lose sight of that, because I think there's a lot of power in it.
I think that's really right, and I agree with what you were saying as well, Shanice. I think there's I kind of felt it I didn't change my mind, for example, on the collective leadership versus the single leader and CEC. Having a back and forth in the room as the debate was happening with a Democratic Bloc person who was in front of me didn't change my mind, but it made me sharpen my argument. Do you know what I mean? Based on the conversation. Yeah. And I think having that moment and that space is so important for the kind of development of the culture of the party, and the leadership are doing such a bad job of facilitating that. I think on the pure delegate versus a combination of delegate and sortition, I've moved a little bit on that actually. I would, in the past I've been pure delegate, but I can see the kind of case that you're making for a bit of both. And I would just say that I think you're right about the internally there's a question mark over to what extent branches have been empowered in terms of their ability to shape the democratic outcomes of the party. I think for me, I was thinking more in terms of externally. If the branches can start getting money and start being approved, if you like, I just think that's really important, basically, for them actually being thriving hubs for political activity and a better culture and a better life.
But just a question on that. My understanding is the motion that passed on the branches just said all branches shall be properly resourced through regional party structures to be able to carry out the full range of organising activities, etc., etc. It doesn't put a figure on it. Like I remember Denblock earlier on were saying like we want branches to keep 20% of their dues or 30 or 50% of their dues or whatever. Unless I'm wrong, I don't think it puts a figure on it. So there's still quite a lot of power in the leadership's hands there, where they get to decide, as far as I can tell, or the CEC will get to decide what the phrase properly resourced means. And, I don't think every branch should automatically have 50% of the dues that it takes, because I actually think a good argument in the party is to push loads of resources into areas where you might not naturally get loads of members, such as in areas where reform are really dominant, post-industrial areas. Like, that's actually where you want to push resources out of the cities into those places. But yeah, like, I do think the leadership still has quite a lot of control as to how much resource branches get.
Yeah, and I think you're right, Jonas, actually, on reflection, that the extent to which the branches will have power isn't a question that we should determine right now, when we're very much looking inwards and kind of branches are focused on these constitutional questions. The landscape is going to completely change when branches start getting out into the world, which they already are doing, but, making a name for themselves, bringing in new members. Actually, the political culture and debate will change drastically when that stuff really starts to kick off nationally. I think when we're talking about the question of who has power, I think we can say conclusively that the Independent Alliance, in many of the kind of votes that happened over conference weekend, probably isn't going to be a significant force in your party moving forward. I think the votes on trans liberation, so both leadership have to support trans liberation, was one of the votes, and then also trans liberation has been added as one of your party's commitments in its political statement. And I think, given that the party is proposing itself to be this kind of democratic, member-led organisation, it's going to be really hard for those who maybe are more inclined towards an anti-trans position to kind of hold significant influence moving forward. Maybe, I think. Yeah. And then my second thought is just on this question of collective leadership. So I did vote for collective leadership, mainly as a protest vote against both Corbyn and Zara, and trying to kind of diffuse the civil war that currently exists between them. But I think I do have a worry about collective leadership in how groups will probably try to run slates and try to seize control of the CEC through the collective leadership model. In my head, ideally, it would be so good to have different sections of the party, different sections of the trade union movement, social movements represented on that leadership body. I think the reality is that people are probably going to try and run slates to seize control of that body. And that, I think, worries me. While on the surface, collective leadership seems great, actually without a real sense of how that will look materially, I think there's a lot of room for it to be gerrymandered.
Is it going to be single transferable vote, the CEC election? Just to get really nerdy. Okay, so my understanding of single transferable vote is that you can run slates, but it does mean that smaller groups that aren't necessarily going to win a majority can still get representation. So that kind of voting system will likely lead to a decent representation of at least different groups across the party, because that's STV is what the DSA use, and I'm pretty sure that's the result in the DSA. Any real voting system nerds who are listening can tell us we've got it wrong.
With glee.
I do think that the CEC election is just going to be really big. I think that, I do want the party to start facing outwards, obviously, but I do also think that it's still in a moment of formation, and the future of it is really up for grabs. And I think the CEC election is really open, and you have, roughly these three factions. You've got the establishment faction around Corbyn that are probably, more associated with the Independent Alliance and more focused on big national electoral stuff. You've got the far left who are pushing for democratic maximalism and probably more interested in organising and stuff. And then you've kind of got Zara floating somewhere in between. And then who knows what SWP, Counterfire, and the various Trotskyist democratic centralist groups are going to do. But you've got these different factions, and it just doesn't seem clear to me which of them are the most powerful at the moment? Which of them are best placed to win the CEC election? It probably depends on which alliances form between now and then. Maybe a key figure in that is Zara, and who Zara ends up teaming up with, you know. But it just feels very wide open, and it's an organisation of 55,000 members. It's going to have like a big financial turnover. It's got a lot of groups across the country. Like it's a bigger prize to control than Momentum ever was in the Labour Party now. And that's, I know it like pales in comparison to the Greens a little bit, but it's still a serious prospect.
One thing I'd say, because I said earlier that I think one of the reasons that the political centre of your party did so badly in a lot of the votes was because there was a kind of fracturing perhaps in their kind of membership coalition, and that meant that, like, you know, lots of people had kind of lost hope and trust in their ability to do this process adequately. I don't think that point should necessarily underwrite the possibility that, like, the centre and Corbyn still have quite a decent groundswell to draw upon and still do quite well, actually, in slate elections. And, you know, part of this depends on, you know, what kind of political leaders are going to come to the fore and try to shape this conversation. There's still a kind of disproportionate amount of influence by Zara and Jeremy, effectively, which is partly why I supported collective leadership. Because I just feel quite bleak and pessimistic about either of the two at the minute being single leaders of your party. I just haven't seen enough demonstration of how that would work. And I think in the short term, collective leadership would be a better option so that you could try and develop new political leaders through that process of a democratic culture. My concern with that, on the other hand, is that it could lead to a kind of paralysis, because we're not necessarily the DSA. We don't have a kind of organising culture necessarily. Like this is very fresh in this process, and I worry it can lead not to great democracy and positive outcomes, but to paralysis ultimately.
That said, having watched the coverage, there was a mix of people who were coming out feeling a bit dejected, but there were actually many more people who were coming out actually feeling part of the democratic process and really enthused with the direction that your party could go in. And I actually think what this lays the ground for is an insurgent new leadership. I think people look at Zara and Jeremy, particularly Jeremy, and they're like, yeah, maybe you've had your time, and maybe we want this project to succeed, but maybe we kind of need to find a new direction to go in. And I think that was part of what motivated the collective leadership vote. But I also think there's, you know, if a new leader was to emerge, someone, you know, who was vibrant, part of the movement, you know, had credibility, I think someone like that could do really, really, really well. I'm not going to name any names who I think that should be.
Should you do a leadership?
No, not me. Bloody hell, no way. But there are probably people listening that, you know, we could pull out some names and be like, you know, this person would be really good, that person would be really good. But I actually think after the conference there is a real ripe opportunity. Ooh, a ripe opportunity for a new insurgent leadership, and that's a good thing. There is still hope lingering.
You know what we haven't talked about? Socialise the economy. Oh wait, no! Nationalise the economy. I got it wrong. Nationalise the entire economy.
Yeah, I mean,
it's such a hot debate.
It is.
I mean, as an answer to, like, what are the three things that you would have as your leading policies? Like, it's just like, I just find it deeply uncompelling. But
Jonas, do you not want to nationalise the entire economy?
Why don't we just get rid of the nation altogether? You know, like why stop at nationalising the whole economy? Like I just find it a bit. I find it a bit frustrating. Like I mean, we can get into this later in the show, I think, a bit more. But like I just think like the kind of policies and the demands you put forward, like as the kind of centerpiece of the party in this moment, have to be connected to people's lives. And if they're not, which I'm sorry, nationalise the whole economy, and you can make
I mean, if free broadband was too much in 2019, then maybe nationalise the entire economy is still too much in 2025.
But I think free broadband would be compelling now. I mean, I'm one of those people that thinks there are lots in the 2019 manifesto that would be quite compelling in today's society. So it's not like necessarily a kind of point against being bold, but like, I just like, what are the antagonisms you're pointing? Who are the subjects you're pointing to? Like where's the strategy involved in it? Like let alone the comms question, right? Like I have skepticisms.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I mean, I'd have no problem with the idea of, seizing control of big corporate companies and banks, all that, as part of my politics. And I think it's pretty much a given for someone who believes, strongly in a socialist and take it even further, a revolutionary horizon. But it's kind of, as you said, Jonas, what is meaningful for people in this moment? What is going to attract people to the project? What is going to make people feel hope about their futures? And it's not nationalize the economy. And maybe actually we have this idea that we can translate into meaningful, hopeful, live, interesting ideas that really capture people's imagination. But nationalize the economy in and of itself isn't that thing.
And I think it's worth saying here, it matters what different people at different levels of the party say in different arenas. Of course, the cadre of the party talking about the long-term, program for socialist transition that involves nationalising different parts of the economy. Of course, we need to have those conversations. We need to have the strategic debates. You've got to prepare for that, even if it feels like a long time away. But our principal spokesperson saying it on what is essentially, it was Owen Jones' show, but essentially a national media outlet where he has more than 1 million followers on YouTube, is just not the one. And I want to tie this in with a broader thing, which is I just do think there is a slightly worrying culture that's emerging of political maximalism in your party, which is very, very much in contrast to the Green Party at the moment. The Green Party are in a way doing a political minimalism where they're like, okay, what are the specific issues that we can focus around, wealth tax and stuff? And they've actually been criticised for that for various reasons, because the wealth tax is not going to raise enough money, etc., etc. But I think in your party, in part because Zara and others have tried to distinguish themselves from, what is now funnily called the right of the party, like Jeremy and his faction, but also the Green Party, they've fallen back on this political maximalism where they are just saying increasingly radical things and taking increasingly radical positions. And, another way this was expressed at conference was a member basically doorstepping Jeremy and accusing him of not being pro-Palestinian enough. You know what I mean? Having a go at Jeremy for not committing to being anti-Zionist and all of this. And I just think this is a complete dead end. If we're spending our time just trying to kick the arses of other people in our party because they won't say they're an anti-Zionist or whatever, it's just an internally facing, maximalist, marginalising politics that puts us completely out of touch with everyone else in the country that we're trying to talk to. And that I really worry about. I really worry about that political culture just becoming stronger and stronger and stronger.
Yeah, I agree with you, but I also think both approaches are wrong. The problem with Zach Polanski's approach, and you saw this with his interview with Rory Stewart and what's the other one? Alistair Campbell. That one. I much prefer Rory, I can't lie. Much prefer Rory.
He's charming, at least. He's
charming. Walker in the van.
Yeah.
Exactly.
He's an ex-colonizer, isn't he? Yeah. We officially say none of them are good.
No. I actually like Rory Stewart, and I will have that on record. I really don't mind.
I wish I got a picture.
And I could litigate that another time, but no one's donating now. No,
you can
but
donate
if you watch...
at lifeoftheparty.uk/support.
If you watch that interview, the problem that Zach has is he has these one-line policies, wealth tax, deal with the water companies, etc. But Rory asked quite a pertinent question, which is that if you look at Cuba, for example, the idea of having socialism in one country, maybe there's a conspiracy, and obviously there was, attacks that project and preventing it from being successful. Zach doesn't have that future vision of actually what is the national, global, institutional, fundamental change that needs to take place in order for socialism in Britain to be possible. He doesn't have that. He has one-line policies. On the contrary, in your party, we've got people who are going all the way to that kind of vision in the future, but have no sense of how you're going to take people on that journey. And they're both wrong. They're both not fit for the moment.
Yeah. I just don't have anything to say after that. That was
Let's wrap it up.
Yeah.
I silenced everyone with the Rory Stewart comment.
I wish I got a picture of Shanice's face when he was saying that. She's leaning back and just looking so smug with yourself. You're like, nah.
Look,
Rory.
I feel I have to explain this now. What it is I really value consistency, and I really value when the internal logic of something just
This is this
works.
week's hot take.
Yeah, and Rory Stewart is just a consistent conservative. He is an ideologically, philosophically consistent conservative, and I admire the consistency, but I don't admire his politics, FYI, to be clear. Anyway, moving on. So I've got in my notes here, Joe hotcakes.
Okay.
I don't think Joe's bringing hotcakes, but Joe, I think you do have a hot take.
I got so many hotcakes. So many hotcakes. Yeah, okay. So I'm doing the hot take this week, and it, builds on that discussion really nicely, I think. And, it's a bit of a reflection after your party conference. Basically, my hot take is that I think, at least for the foreseeable future, your party should really focus on base building, organising and building social infrastructure and communities, and just leave the electoral stuff to the Green Party. Just pretty much completely leave elections to the Green Party. And I'll explain why. So, like we've said on this podcast a bunch of times, and we've all written it in different ways, we're not going to achieve socialist transition just through electoral power. You can't just get elected and then get into Westminster, pull some levers, and then, you've got socialism. It's this, struggle through the institutions. It's going to involve massive conflict, and you're going to have to build various sources of power that aren't just MPs in Parliament or councillors. It'll involve really strong trade unions. It'll involve really strong communities. It'll involve tenant unions. It'll involve deep organising to, frankly, remind people that collective struggle and realising yourself through collective struggle is a thing, and that you can be powerful as individuals together. That's, that is what's needed, and it, is desperately needed in this country. And I think that, there's a bit of an emerging division of Labour in the movement between the Green Party and your party, in that the Greens have obviously surged in the polls, and they've got this charismatic individual leader in Zach Palanski, who's, really broken through, and I don't think any of us would have expected that he'd have broken through in the way that he has. The party's remarkably united, actually, despite having been, just basically overtaken by young socialists. Everyone's really quite happy about it because the polls are going up and because they have a pretty collegiate culture. And they actually have a bunch of people, including, Chris Williams, who's the head of elections in the Green Party, who are pretty experienced at winning elections with very few resources and against the odds, either at the level of council or for MPs in the last election. And they're obviously now in this productive dynamic with kind of polls and the mainstream press and Labour, where it's are the Greens going to hit this tipping point where they overtake Labour and become the centre-left or the left party in the country that can take on reform at the next election? And, we've seen that the anti-reform vote is powerful. That last by-election in, I can never say, is it Caerphilly? Is that how you say it? The placement, yeah, Caerphilly in Wales. Plaid did incredibly well, and it's because the anti-reform vote flocked to Plaid. And there is, a genuine possibility now that the Greens could surpass Labour in the polls, and they could become the party at the next election where the anti-reform vote goes to try and stop Nigel Farage coming in. So this is incredibly exciting for them. It's also incredibly exciting for the left in general. But, because they have this massive opportunity, this massive electoral opportunity, I think it is just going to be the case that the Greens are going to massively focus on elections. I just don't, there's lots of people in the Greens that think that base building and building social infrastructure and going out and organising communities and bringing people together and doing stuff with and for people without just going and asking for their vote. There's lots of people in the party that think that's really important. But at the same time, they have this massive opportunity because they're surging in the polls and they could essentially destroy the Labour Party. And I actually think they should probably take that opportunity and they should probably focus on that, And their barometers of success should be next May's council elections, although they should try and avoid actually winning councils because you don't want to run councils. You should, you know what I mean? That'll be one of their barometers of success, and polls will be a barometer for their success. But I think we have to accept that they're probably going to get pulled really hard in the direction of electoralism, and they're not going to do a lot of the organising and base building work that needs to be done. At the same time, you've got your party, right, who do not have a charismatic individual leader. They're very divided rather than united, massively down in the polls. And yet, there are 55,000 members. The organisation is potentially worth £1 to £3 million a year, depending on how much people are paying and how much fundraising they do. And you have proto branches that will become branches across the country. that can go out and do a lot of the base building social infrastructure work that we've talked about. Like 1 to 3 million a year could be spent on loads of organisers that focus on elections and loads of National Party staff. It could also be spent opening social centres and buildings in formerly industrialised regions of this country that Reform are doing really well in, and actually like showing that the left has a presence in these places. Like that money could go to that. We don't have to hire a national staff in your party or a big national staff if we don't want to. And I just think that like understanding that this is the context now, your party can't be judging itself based on how it performs next May, because it's going to perform badly, frankly. Or it can't be judging itself based on, you know, the polls, because I just don't think your party is going to go up in the polls, especially with a collective leadership. Like, you know, I think a single individual leader is really, really important for that. And I think that if your party and if people in your party see that as the barometer of success, then it'll just feel like we're always failing. You know what I mean? Now, like, there'll be wrinkles in this. Like, it's not that your party won't do any elections. I'm sure Jeremy and Zara will run. Maybe they'll run and try and win 5 or 10 seats the next election. It's not that electoralism as a tactic is completely dead or should be completely killed, but I think the party has this huge opportunity to actually do all of the base building work that we always talk about, precisely because the leadership have fucked it up so much that it's not going to be electorally successful anytime soon. And I know this has been seen as like a, you know, like a real negative, but there is this kind of like positive element to it.
Yeah, thanks. That was really useful. I was having a conversation with a friend in the pub on Sunday. I was only at the conference for the Saturday. We went and we did a listener exercise in an area called Harts Hill on the Sunday afternoon, and then met some friends for a drink. And I was talking to a friend who had come to our launch, was just pumped at the launch and was pumped when your party announced itself and isn't pumped anymore and doesn't really see it going anywhere. And I think we have to take that quite seriously. We have to take that kind of disrepair of credibility amongst like normal people, not people who organize politics like every other day. Like, we have to take that quite seriously. And that has to be for me, that's a bit of a barometer for like the ability of the party to kind of recover its self, not strictly electorally. I'm quite sympathetic to Joe's take. I think there are like some issues to that, like obvious internal issues that could stimulate that, like the centre, the things that politicians say that discredit you. I do worry a little bit, I'll be honest, about the cultures of the far left, where this isn't seen as a party that you build. To be clear, I'm a member of a far left organisation. I'm in RS21 Revolutionary Socialism in the 21st. I'm not worried about RS21, but like I am worried about like other far left organisations who can tend to treat your party and things like it quite parasitically and as boons for their own campaigning priorities. These are things that concern me, and I worry about how that affects its growth, its ability to develop culturally and its ability to become serious and not like a toy. Like, I saw someone on Twitter trolling and saying that they hadn't heard anything from your party in a couple of days, and that it's polling at 1%, because there was a poll that came out the other day that had it at 1%. And, you know, on the one hand, I'm like, it's probably a good thing you haven't heard from it for a few days at the current rate. And I don't get my political advice from Twitter either. But on the other hand, it did remind me just how much the internet and the attention economy like shape and manage expectations and like short-term logic amongst both participants and observers. And that's like unavoidable, especially when this new party has failed in some of the most basic competencies over the last few months. I do think we have to resist that logic a little bit, of like the internet logic a little bit, as a kind of measure of success sometimes, whilst being clear that like, you know, the center of the party has made it 1,000 times harder in lots of ways. But I do think we can't deny the job on we have for like building the credibility of the organization again. Like, another friend I was chatting to yesterday kind of really intelligently remarked to me that like, now that Corbyn might be playing a smaller role, the party does need to start defining itself before it becomes totally and negatively defined by its enemies or its interlocutors, its public figures who have bad ideas for how it should be defined. And so there's this question there, and this is an open question. I can put it to you guys, but it's also to our audience a little bit, like our comrades and our friends, is that like, when you have the kind of structure around political leadership that we kind of talked about in the last episode, where parliamentary leadership is so dominant because of the relationship to the first past the post system, how do you produce new forms of political leadership that aren't strictly tied to elections, right? That's something that comes out from what you were saying, Joe, that I think we need to think about quite carefully. Because like, I see plenty of opportunities, for example, your party fielding and doing quite well in council elections in different parts of the country where the Greens aren't necessarily strong. Whether that should be our priority or how we should conceptualize that actually is really important. Is it a councillor so you can go to loads of boring meetings, or are you a councillor as an organiser, as we talked in the past on this podcast? But there's a part of me that feels a bit sanguine about this. I'm reading a book called What's Left by a guy called Malcolm Harris, an American author. And Malcolm Harris talks about like the kind of different poles in American society pushing for structural change. So he talks about market crafters, people who want to use the state to inaugurate a kind of green form of capitalism. He talks about public power. So people from Lina Khan to Zoran Mamdani, people who are like social democrats or socialists or progressives. And then he talks about communists. I've got a bunch of disagreements, but I like the way that he frames some of this, because he talks, of course, there will be antagonisms and differences between these different three constituencies, but there will be moments when there will be alliances, and there will be moments when you will be able to take advantage of something that the other group of people do. And I think we have to kind of conceptualize our relationship, or your party's relationship, to the Greens a little bit like that. Some people on the left would just quite easily like to denounce the Greens as hippie liberals who don't have a working class base. They should go and look at the kind of electorate that the Greens draws in urban centres. And there are those in the Greens who think the entire left should collapse everything behind Zach and the Greens. And I really agree with Joe about maybe these two organisations serve two different functions. And I put it like this. I think Zach Polanski at the minute is opening a huge space politically for a critique of the kind of decaying and declining institutions of capitalist power in this country. But I think Shanice talked about it earlier. He's going nowhere near far enough for what the moment demands. And I think as well as doing all of the important organising that Joe is talking about, and that being the bedrock of what we do, it also needs to be connected to a vision. Zach got a bit caught up in his interview with Rory Stewart, Shanice's fave, and Alistair Campbell, in terms of talking about like the Bank of England and modern monetary theory. But I think we have to have a vision that connects the organising that Joe's talking about to these big institutions of capitalist power, the Bank of England, the Treasury, the Department for Work and Pensions, all institutions that immiserate us, discipline us, indebt us, and then connect them to basic things that humans need: food, home. Humans don't need this necessarily, but work. I think like there needs to be a kind of connective tissue. And I think that organising and putting organising at the centre and seeing how that process can produce new forms of political leadership and be wedded to a much more radical vision, but not a maximalist declarative vision, is really important for how your party goes forward.
Yeah, I initially thought I'd really disagree with this hot take, but actually I'm finding myself really quite in alignment for a few reasons. I think, first of all, maybe the stuff around your party and the infighting and how that's destroyed your party's start and created a bit of a false start is a little bit overstated. It feels intense being in it. It feels intense observing it live. But actually, if we zoom out historically a little bit, there are precedents in other parties. So I think, for example, of Podemos, that had quite a similar start with lots of factionalism, the leaders trying to seize control, banning at the first conference, marginalising the left in debates. And actually, I would say the leadership of Podemos probably went a lot further than the centre of your party went with some of these crazy factional manoeuvres. And actually, Podemos was still able to build off the back of that. It ended up in lots of massive and serious failures, but nevertheless, it was able to recover from that false start. So there's that. There is when you zoom out of history a little bit and see yourself as more part of something bigger, as opposed to just the intensity of the moment, that we're able to maybe take a slightly different view there. But, you know, your party should definitely play to its strengths. You know, it has lots and lots of committed and experienced activists, loads of people who have been part of social movements for years, loads of experience there, some really serious cadre, building branches from the bottom up, bringing new members in, having really serious political debates. Actually, if you look at some of the debates that have taken place, even though they've been fractious, even though they've sometimes been toxic, even though they've sometimes been, hosted in places that aren't that helpful, such as online, actually, what other political parties are having the level of debate, even though it's not that great, that your party are having? And there is some element of strength there. And I think, we often talk about the way in which Thatcherism and later Blair and later the financial crisis and austerity has destroyed the ability of the working class to organize for itself, make decisions, about its structure and the way it lives in the world and its ability to reproduce itself. Long and short, we talk about the fact that the working class's ability to live and live well has been destroyed. And we talk about the need to kind of rebuild working class institutions and rebuild working class power. Maybe your party is best placed to do that work. Zach Polanski is going from strength to strength in terms of his ability to communicate and his ability to reach people and be heard. I think that he's being taken a lot seriously by the establishment media, and for the pros and cons of that, I think he's being considered a real political player on the kind of in the electoral sphere. And your party doesn't have an equivalent. I think Zara Sultana's speech, for example, at your party conference was really good politically in lots of different ways. And actually her openness and honesty to be like, hands up, I've made some mistakes and I'm sorry, and I played a role in that, is really good. But does she engage with mainstream media anymore? I think she largely boycotts mainstream media. Yeah. And, she can write some really good speeches, but I wouldn't say she's, our best orator and doesn't have that kind of natural oratory that Zach Polanski has. So whether your party will be able to kind of change its image in the mainstream media, I doubt. But actually, we don't need a positive image in the mainstream media in order to kind of rebuild working class power. In fact, we need to be thinking quite seriously about how we build alternative ways for information, for political debate, for culture to be reproduced at the ground level and from below, and not just necessarily in the kind of bourgeois media and bourgeois institutions. So yeah, I think I'm actually agreeing with you, Joe. I think maybe your party needs to build its base first and build from below first and reassess, will there be strategic elections that make sense to go for in the future? But for that not to be the question that dominates the strategy moving forward now.
Yeah, and I think the caveat maybe I should add, or the addition, is that just it won't naturally happen within your party. Like, as Jonas said, the leadership faction are obviously MPs, and the party was founded by MPs. Yeah. There's going to be a kind of an obvious and a dominant and an unthinking kind of orientation and desire for electoralism, right? Like that's going to be there, and it's going to be assumed that the marker of success for the party is how many MPs have we got elected, or how many councillors have we got elected and stuff. So, and I actually think that will probably be the dominant assumption, maybe amongst the majority of the membership. Like I don't think it's dominant amongst the majority of the membership that, oh yeah, organising is really important, we should focus on that. So I think if people agree with me, like, we're gonna have to make this happen. You know what I mean? And one of the ways you make this happen, and this is not me, it's not me trying to organise it, it's not my job, but one of the ways to make this happen will be having a slate that runs on the CEC, basically arguing for this and making the argument that this is what the party should do, both because it's incredibly important, has always been incredibly important for socialist projects, but maybe more precisely and specifically because of the situation in which we find ourselves in, where actually electoral opportunities for your party will be few and far between. I think maybe one of the unanswered questions that relates very closely to this argument is just how much coverage and how much potential does your party have in areas that the Greens doesn't? Because this is obviously one of the key arguments from some people in your party. It's like, well, the Greens are middle class and liberal and urban, and we can do things in places that the Greens can't. Like, I just don't know how much I buy that. I like maybe that is true. I'm sure in some instances it's definitely true. I'm not saying there's no instance of like a place where your party is going to have more potential than the Greens, but how widespread is it, and is it widespread enough to justify an electoral strategy being dominant in the organisation? And then I think I just want to reinforce what you guys were saying about mediatisation of politics, representation, and the the difficulty that political parties have having to operate in this arena when they're trying to contest national elections. Like, we're always in this contradiction of not wanting to be on the billionaire-owned platforms and not wanting to individualize our politics through leaders, but at the same time understanding that it's really important if you want to get masses of people to vote for you at an election, and we're always stuck in that bind. And I think what I'm trying to articulate is that maybe your party has a certain freedom here, actually. Like, there's a certain freedom to just not do that, or if to not do that, not care about that so much and not emphasize that so much, and actually just emphasize all of this other stuff that always gets pushed to the side because it's harder and whatever, and it doesn't benefit kind of elites in the party. Like, we can focus on that stuff and we can put resources towards that stuff.
Yeah, and I do sometimes get frustrated with those on our side who look to the Greens and are like, oh yeah, they're just middle class hippies. I think it ignores, for example, the base that Mohsin Ali has brought in to the Green Party. You know, working class base. Muslim working class people from Leeds as well. And, in all these debates that we're having around social conservatism and trans liberation and who's legitimately working class and who is the legitimate representative of the working class, actually, there's a really good example of, a Muslim leader bringing in working class base into the Green Party. And I think for some of the lefties who are a bit snooty about the Greens and kind of ignore those political actors and political agents, I do find that quite frustrating. And also the Green Party have 2 rural-based MPs, for all, again, the conversation around who they can appeal to and who they don't. They just appeal to, London's liberal elite. It's just not that true. It's also the same with, your party and the Independent Alliance. Ayub Khan and Shaka Adam and Adnan Hussein don't represent that kind of stereotype London liberal elite. And so there's potentials for the left, I think, is the lesson there, whether you're in the Green Party or whether you're in your party. But there are probably still some aesthetic reasons why in some places, a traditionally working class, labour movement based organisation might have more appeal than an organisation that has a more urban vibe and feel to it.
Yeah, I think I would even complicate it a little bit further, which is to say that like a lot of like, the labour movement in a lot of post-industrial places is really withered, and it is not the force that it was. Trades councils aren't like the strongholds of power that they might have been in the past, and aren't able to produce, even if you put to one side the kind of schism between economics and politics that exists within the labour movement, aren't necessarily able to produce those kinds of political articulation that Shanice referred to. In terms of like the membership of your party, and like it's absolutely the case that most people who got involved in your party did it on the basis that they want a national party that does elections and is an electoral alternative. But I do think, if you go to a meeting, for example, a lot of the things that lay members talk about is like social infrastructure stuff, is like, how do we reach people? Can we, have coffee mornings? Can we have hubs? Do you know what I mean? We need to meet people where they're at. Do you know what I mean? Like, can we do some campaigns? Like, so there is a lot of that actually exists. Like, I do think there is a growing common sense that like you have to do elections plus all of this other stuff. I guess like how people conceptualize that other stuff is very all over the place. The word community organizing means 1,000 different things to 1,000 different people. And I think that's the kind of terrain that the kind of left in the party who want to build power within the working class need to really step onto and think about the arguments that they make and the practices that they develop. Kind of thread in this conversation and a thread through this podcast is like, we're not that interested in a kind of declarative maximalism, and we're also not that interested in like minimalism. And then we want to have some kind of connection between the two as our kind of the locus of our politics. And I would just say about Zach, even though I still stand by particularly what me and Shanice have said in this episode, I think he didn't do a terrible job of doing that on last night's Question Time, where he said, I am for open borders, but then also said we need a progressive migration policy. The left is going to have to work through some of those questions, because he's obviously on that front at least, he is trying to marry a kind of no to immigration controls politics with present political reality. And I think we have to think quite carefully about that. And I would just say kudos for trying to do it, because it's not an easy thing to do. And I'll close on this. I maybe disagree a little bit with you guys, as in I totally see that there's a tension between creating political leaders and wanting to do the organizing work, and that is a tension produced by the way in which capitalist society is structured, the way the media is structured, the way the attention economy is structured, the way that produces certain forms of sociality. But I do just think mainstream media is quite important, basically. Like, I do think it is important to have a political representative that speaks to wider layers of like the population. Like, my granddad doesn't go on social media and my granddad is part of a cohort of the population which is growing in size each year. Even my mum and dad, like they have social media accounts and they do go on social media, but they watch the news, they listen to the radio. And I do just think in those instances that you do need political leadership that's able to speak on those formats, or to speak on those formats, to speak across those formats, to know that when you're on those formats, you are speaking not to the person that you're being interviewed by, but to a wider audience of people, and you're trying to communicate your politics to them. And I just don't think there's been enough at all of that kind of knowledge in the back of the head of some of the people that lead your party.
I think we need that as a movement, and as a movement that comes from various places. Like, we have Zach leading the Green Party, we have people from Navarra and other bigger left media organisations. Like, those spokespeople do come from various different places. My question is it a priority for your party to produce those people and build those people up? Or could your party have an opportunity to focus on the other, deeper work that a lot of other organizations just aren't able to do because they get dragged into this kind of like media leadership cycle, which is absolutely essential for elections? Like, I have no criticism of like Zach and the Green Party focusing on that. They absolutely have to do that. But I'm just saying that, like, maybe your party has an opportunity to not do that. And I think just maybe another caveat to my frame, like, this is not to say, and maybe I said this and I shouldn't have said this is not to say that your party can't be a national party. Like, your party could be doing this everywhere across the country. It's just what it's doing is different to the Green Party. And you could happily, in a place, have, the Green Party focusing on trying to win the elections, and then your party trying to focus on doing more of the base building, right? And my friend in Newham, your party, actually said this to me. He was like, I'm not part of the Greens because everything in Newham Greens is arcing around the council elections and it's arcing around the general election. But it feels like we actually have the opportunity to, in his words, think about what it means to like do revolutionary organising in Newham, and for him that was an exciting prospect. And I think that the final thing I'll say about this is that it then takes the tension and the sting out of the relationship between your party and the Greens. It means that we don't have to have this constant, never-ending argument as to whether you should be in your party or the Greens. You kind of get the question answered for yourself, because it's like, well, okay, who's strong locally and what do I care more about, elections or doing the base building stuff? And then that kind of answers the question. Both people in each of the party then see there's a bit of a division of labour and that it can be like productive and you can work together. Zara then isn't incentivized to go around criticising Zach Polanski and the Greens all the time and trying to find these points of differentiation. And basically, like, everyone just works better together as part of the movement ecology. And then obviously when it comes to general election time or whatever, it'll be far easier for the parties to make an agreement, because your party will be like, well, look, we only really want to run in these 5 seats or 10 seats or 12 seats or whatever.
I guess there's a sense in which it's symbiosis, right? Like, as an activist, when you're in an activist group and let's say you're doing a direct action, you have the thing that's happening on the day on the ground, and then you have the thing that you say in the media, and you've got to make sure you've got someone kind of charismatic and knows the key messages and is able to deliver them in their Guardian interview or their BBC interview or whatever. And maybe there's a sense in which we need some of that. Like, we can do the base building, we can do rebuild working class power from the ground up, we can throw ourselves into building locally, or actually to build consent to that work, to build the legitimacy of that work, to build support for that work, have someone in the media who's bigging it up and is able to speak really powerfully to the politics of what's going on the ground. The only caveat to that is you need someone who can do that well. You need someone charismatic. You need someone who's, not a defensive communicator, is humorous, like quite naturally humorous. You need someone who is able to kind of, take critique
stop
on the chin.
describing yourself.
Me? No, I'm not. I am neither naturally humorous.
This
no,
is the beginning of Shanice's leadership bid for your party. If anyone didn't understand that, that's the point of this podcast.
That's where all the money's going.
Yeah.
Not gonna happen. Not gonna happen. I would rather lie in a coffin and pretend to be a vampire for the next 10 years than yeah, exactly.
That sounds
just
proper
like
chill.
chill out, then be anywhere near leadership of your party. But I don't think it's any surprise, actually, that both Zach Polanski and Zoran Mamdani have an arts background, actually, have a communication background. As much as me and my partner cuss out comms brain and like comms being the dominant way of conceptualizing politics in the modern kind of time, actually you do need someone who's proficient in communicating with people and telling stories and connecting and using their voice and intonation and accent in ways that capture people's imagination. You need that. And oftentimes it doesn't come from your kind of typical political operators and MPs.
Yeah, and just emphasize, like, I'm not saying that your party should never go on the media and they shouldn't have good spokespeople. Like, I think pretty much every left-wing organisation should have the capacity to do that to a certain extent. And, you know, the London Renters Union has spokespeople that goes on the media and they do it. It's just like, how central is that to the model of what you're doing and how much resource and time and emphasis do you put into that? The Green Party, I think, should be putting a ton of time and emphasis into that. And they should be putting a ton of time into making sure that Zach is incredible on media and is also building up other people to do that. I think if your party has more of a focus on organising and base building and social infrastructure, it means you'll have less of a focus on that.
Yeah, look, I think we all agree here. I would just say that the organising as the kind of what should be the structure and dynamic of your party going forward, and that kind of division of labour, which I think we all kind of agree with, will confront a kind of inevitability, which is that if you have political representatives, if you are a political party, you will have to say stuff in the media sphere. And I guess there are two ways in which you can go about it, right? There are more than two, but I'll just say two for now. One is you can kind of say, oh, what Zach's saying's not radical enough, and I'm going to say that's some more radical stuff. Or you can radicalize the space. You can occupy the space and radicalize it that Zach has opened up. Not in a sectarian way, but in a way that tries to seize the moment. And that's what I want to hear more of from your party in the future, wedded to base building and organising and building power and working class life.
All right. Well, another fruitful conversation. Thank you, lads. So before we go into the readings for this week, we actually have another ask. This one isn't related to money, so don't worry. But we want some questions from you, Joe.
Yeah, so we're going to do... Look, we're not going anywhere over Christmas. You're gonna get your Eve of Christmas episode, I think, on like the 22nd or something like that. There's not gonna be any sad mundane 2 weeks where you don't get to listen to Life of the Party just because we couldn't be asked to do it. But we are going to do an episode which might be slightly easier on us. We're very hard to prep. And what we want to do is we want to do a listener episode where basically you guys send in questions that you want us to talk about and answer. They can be really deep and serious, and like 15 paragraphs, and we will read it.
All right, relax, mate. I don't know about that.
or you can just ask us about how our personal lives are going, and we probably will ignore it. But you can ask us. You can ask us. You can ask us nonetheless. So look, if you want to ask us a question, just email us podlifeoftheparty@gmail.com. You can also comment on this episode on Spotify. You can at us on Twitter. You can DM us on Instagram. If you happen to have one of our numbers, you can also WhatsApp us. I'm not giving out my number on the podcast. That's fucking bad idea. I'm not doing that. But yeah, look, just get in touch, and then we'll do a listeners episode in 2 weeks, and we'll all wear Christmas hats or something.
All right, so on to readings then. So Jonas, what are you reading?
Yeah, perhaps this is a bit of a theme on this show, but I'm reading Elena Ferrante's The Days of Abandonment.
Oh, is it good?
It's just remarkable.
Is it good?
Yeah.
Oh, I'll read that over Christmas.
I'm about halfway through it, and it's about a wife who is left by her husband, and it's gut-wrenchingly good. She's just such an evocative writer, and I'm also watching the TV version of My Brilliant Friend, the Neapolitan Quartet novels that I read about a decade ago. I think Joe mentioned on this show before, and it's just stunning. I would read the books first, but the show is stunning. Yeah. Elena Ferrante, not her real name, but big her up.
And Joe.
All right, so I got one politics, one fiction. My politics one, obviously very closely related to the topic of the episode. I was reading over the social infrastructure proposals that came from a working group of Organising for Popular Power, which is one of the factions within your party. It was founded at TWT this year, and they're just really good. There's just like so many proposals for what the party could do with its resource and what local branches could do if they were properly resourced, that I genuinely think would be such a step forward in what left political parties have done in this country over the last 10 or 15 years. And I think running up to the CEC elections and thinking about what the potentials are there, like I really, really, really would suggest that people read them. And obviously the link will be in the show notes. I mean, the fiction that I've been reading, it's kind of fiction but non-fiction. It's a book called 3 Women by Lisa Taddeo, I think is the second name. And it is non-fiction. It's a story of 3 women basically describing their relationship with sex and desire over the course of their life and like the various like mad shit that they've been involved in that's happened to them. And this woman traveled across the US to meet like hundreds of women and decided to tell these 3 women's stories. But it's written in the third person in a way where it like feels like fiction. But then when you're reading it, sometimes you're like, oh shit, but these are real people. And then you fall back into it and it's like it's a story again. And it's just written in this really urgent, brilliant and beautiful way. And it's super readable and it's totally pulled me in. So yeah, a good Christmas present, I think.
Thanks, Joe. So I've been ill this week, so I haven't been doing much reading or watching of anything, mostly sleeping and resting and recuperating. But I did watch quite a lot of Richard Hames' coverage of the Your Party conference. And I think if you weren't at conference and you want to get a sense of like the vibe and people's like honest, genuine reactions to the conference, definitely watch Richard Hames' coverage on Novara. I think there could have been slightly more challenging questions put to Jeremy and Zara, just on the handling of everything that's happened in the party so far. But on the human level, like chatting to the delegates and just really getting a sense of the vibe and the mood of the conference, it's really, really good coverage. So yeah, I would tap into that. Oh yeah, I need to wrap up the episode now. Oh, we're losing our minds.
It's December.
So yeah, thank you so much for listening. We hope that was useful. As Joe said earlier in the episode, we are trying to make space in our lives to do much more of this, do it even better in 2026. So your support, if you are able to donate regularly, will really help us do that. And yeah, send us your questions, but peace out for now.
Bye-bye.